Hello again, GE201. In this video I will go over the first two questions in part 1 of chapter 5, the Caribbean, on environmental topics and the population and settlement, or the demographics of the region. There are serious environmental problems in Haiti. The level of poverty there is unmatched in the Western Hemisphere. The life expectancy is the lowest in the Americas. Historically, this was the first successful uprising against a colonial master. Hispaniola, the western end of the island, which is today Haiti, successfully overthrew the French forces that were trying to subjugate them, led by Toussaint Louverture, and Haiti became the first independent country in Latin America. But subsistence farming is the main occupation, and there's been problems there for over 100 years now, and the military of the United States has been in there more than once. By 1950, the destructive cycle of environmental and economic impoverishment was established. There was heavy political corruption under the Duvaliers, who were dictators, Baby Doc. And because of deforestation, which is what many of the residents there attempt to do, they chop wood down and they go to the cities to try to sell the wood, or they use the wood themselves to cook with, and it's just completely decimated this country. And now the soil has been washed away, and only 3% of the island remains forested today, and that number is continuing to decline. As a result, many Haitians immigrate to Europe and the United States. This has been a problem in the Caribbean for centuries. And with deforestation, as mentioned in other videos, comes the degradation of the soil. And when that happens, it leads to the extinction of plants and animals. And you see some examples. All different kinds of monkeys used to exist in the Caribbean, and many of them are extinct today. And poor agricultural practices is a big reason why, along with deforestation. Climate change is threatening this region as the sea levels rise. You see that here on Saipan. Many coral reefs have been destroyed, and rainfall is all over the map. Why? Many of these forests were felled to make way for sugarcane plantations, or to build houses, fencing, or ships, and the soil does not hold up. The larger islands, new land was constantly cleared and the older ones abandoned or allowed to go fallow. On the smaller islands, labor-intensive efforts to conserve the soil and maintain fertility were employed. Haiti, as we said, has lost most of its cover. Jamaica and the Dominican still retain their forests, as does Puerto Rico. I don't know what's left after the hurricane that went through Puerto Rico. That place was wiped out, as what happened to us with Sudalor. The rimland, it's a coastal zone of the mainland, beginning with Belize and extending along the coast of Central America to northern South America. Biological diversity is threatened here less threatened here than in the rest of the region. They have created a community-managed wildlife sanctuary for those howler monkeys. In Suriname, this is an interesting place, the maroon population is resisting the logging industry and mining in areas that they have lived since gaining freedom from slavery 200 years ago. Hurricanes are a major problem in this part of the world, and the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida, tracks and tries to predict where these Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf of Mexico storms are going to go. They also happen in the Eastern Pacific. When it reaches 75 miles an hour or more, it's considered to be a hurricane. It's the same season as here, and there's usually 6 to 12 a year. They usually form off the coast of Africa, and they travel westward. And if they get into the Gulf, they become monsters. as the one that hit New Orleans in 2006. On top of that, Haiti had a bad earthquake in 2010, on top of being hammered by hurricanes just about every year. Population, again, urbanization is the trend. But another interesting demographic trend is a decline in fertility in these particular regions. HIV and AIDS has been a problem here. And they're trying to educate people on the use of condoms. The diaspora, the economic flight of the Caribbean peoples across the globe, has defined the existence and identity of the region. Barbadians like to go to London, England, Brixton. The Surinamese like to go back to Holland, and I actually played soccer in 1972 at Lloyd. He was from this part of the world a long time ago, and his family immigrated to the Netherlands, Amsterdam, where my grandparents used to live. Puerto Ricans like to go to the U.S., mainly New York or New Jersey. Cubans like to go to Miami, and the Haitians or the Dominican go all over the Gulf Coast and East Coast of the United States, and the West Coast as well, anywhere they can, because Haiti has bad problems. And we talked about how remittances are then sent back if possible. Sometimes a man or a woman leaves the children behind, they find work, and eventually they come back, because you don't need a lot of money to live in some of these areas. We've talked about the rural to urban continuum. Sometimes there's seasonal labor on corporate farms, but again, that's declining because agriculture becomes more and more mechanized. The Caribbean city, 64%, that's probably a little higher now, is classified as urban. The big cities, Havana, Santo Domingo, Port-au-Prince, and San Juan. Havana was the strategic port of the Spanish Empire, and Paramaribo, Suriname, has been called a tropical tulip-less extension of the Netherlands. And they have the same shantytown, favela, barrio, ghetto problems. Culture, we have time to do this one in this part. Many of these Caribbean nations have a common similarity as being part of the legacy of the plantation economics. And they are a blending of these different cultures, Amerindian, African, and European. And it's sometimes called creolization. French Creole, these are some of the dialects that have been created from these combinations. Merengue, music, but what's been the legacy of colonialism? It destroyed a lot of indigenous societies because of disease, inhumane treatment, and malnutrition. Again, these groups almost died out in the aftermath of Columbus because of disease. Plantation America was a term coined by the anthropologist Charles Wegley to describe a cultural region that extends from midway up the coast of Brazil through the Guyanas and the Caribbean into the southeastern United States. It was a production system, not race-based system, but in the United States it was race-based. It was reliant on monocrop production, a single commodity, such as sugar, tobacco, or cotton, indigo, rice. After slavery ended, colonial governments began contracting indentured labor, and as a result of that, many people from Suriname ended up in Java, and some indentured labor came from India. This region saw 10 million Africans come in during the African diaspora, the forced removal of Africans because of the slave trade. It also crossed the Sahara to include North Africa, and it linked East Africa with the slave trade in Southwest Asia or the Middle East. Senegal, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, and Angola were the main source areas, and runaway slaves created maroon societies that settled in very remote areas. They didn't want to be bothered, and they continued these African practices, and some Africans have actually gone to these regions to try and recapture some of the things that they did hundreds of years ago. They are fighting against the loggers and the miners and the corporate farmers. Voodoo priests came out of this region, and the Duvaliers would use them to scare off government opposition. And that's it for this particular section.